Hello, and welcome back. Hopefully, you've had a chance to look at your prediction guides that I furnished for you. If not, I would recommend taking a minute or two and do that. The prediction guides, although I don't want to do them all the time and wear them out, has been known to make the lectures more applicable to certainly different types of learners. And when you're done with the lecture, you can go back and compare, what you know what the realities were of the history in the lessons with what you predicted. This week we continue to head a tad bit farther south, and then we're going to be taking a look at South Asia, and next week we start to head west. So you can turn to page 276 in your textbook. And speaking of the textbooks, I would use them as an accompaniment after kind of ascertaining what I'm focusing on in the lecture models. And that way you're not wasting your time reading about what you do not need to know in order to get the grade, right? So if you have time, by all means, I encourage you to read and read as much as you can, and therefore learn as much as you can about the region. But I'm only going to highlight so much, and it's enough. But I'm not going to highlight everything in the chapter. I never do, probably never will. So this chapter is a chapter where I do have a certain interest in a certain section, just to tip you off. Um, and that particular section may not be a major focus for most folks who teach this course at this level. So, but I will alert you to that one when we get there, and as the week unfolds, you'll see that I do have a certain interest in particular region, sub-region of this particular chapter. Objectives. Where do we want to go here this week? We want to investigate the impact of pre-colonial cultures upon the regions, recognize current political formation due to the colonial past, and there's a lot to that, right? Enter the British, and understand. Well, here it is. Here's the section, the region, sub-region. We want to understand the conflict in Kashmir. I'm always interested in Kashmir, and not a whole lot's changed up there in the past couple of decades, but I haven't had time to look at that recently, and hence the in the news, right? The in the news are my students kind of do my dirty work for me. So hopefully some of you pick up that theme when we get there, when it's your time to do in the news. So some of the major heads up terms here we're going to be looking at Mughal, that's the Muslims, Sikhism, the Sikhs, kind of a religion related to Hinduism. The Dravidians. The Dravidians came from southern India, assimilated with some of the Southeast Asian tribes and maybe the earliest people group in the region. The caste order, right? Some of you probably heard about this. Caste order is kind of an order of layers of classes, right? And at the bottom of that layer are the untouchables. Right? We'll dwell on them a little bit. Jainism, another religion in this region that's closely tied to Hinduism. The British East India Company. The British East India Company pursued trade with the East Indies. Kashmir, right? Kashmir, an area that was kind of carved up by the British, set aside, and kind of divided up between the Pakistanis and the Indians, and major cause of conflict. We'll talk about that more as the chapter unfolds. I could talk about that at length anytime. Indira Gandhi, the first woman prime minister in India, and have a little video film clip for you guys um, during the week, a couple 3 minutes. Her son, and she was mid 60s to mid 70s. Her son uh, ruled as prime minister in the mid to late 80s. Rajiv Gandhi, of course, Mahatma Gandhi led the nonviolent resistance to oust the British. And there you have it. So let's get into this, and I'm going to start getting into the early cultures. And right off the bat, you guys are going to have some. I see you have some lecture space there or some writing space. But let me just set this up. You should have your textbooks open at page 276. South Asia is the smallest world region, yet it has a huge, rapidly growing population. So by 2025, in fact, there's going to be an estimated 2 billion people that will inhabit that region, one of both physical and cultural diversity. By 2025, maybe it will surpass China. The people of South Asia represent many ethnicities with marked uh, religious and natural differences. And you have a prominent ethnic division that's between the Indo-Aryans of northern India and the Dravidian people I mentioned a few minutes ago of southern India. Now, the Indo-Aryans are ethno-linguistic, referring to native speakers of the Indo-Iranian people group, where the Dravidians, again, from southern India, assimilated with Southeast Asian tribes. Hinduism. Hinduism is the oldest religion in the region and currently has about 800 million adherents, most of whom live in India. Buddhism and Jainism were founded in the Ganges River Valley, and you can see that on your map there. Ganges River Valley in about 6th century BC in reaction to aspects of Hinduism. Buddhism, Buddha, more into good works, and felt that Hinduism was maybe a little too clinical, doctrinaire, and yeah, just not as people oriented. Neither dominates the region, Buddhism or Jainism. Neither dominates the region spatially. With Buddhism most prominent in Sri Lanka and beyond, probably, and beyond South Asia. Sri Lanka, if you take a look at your map there, right at the tip of the Indian Peninsula, easy to see. And Jainism to approximately about 300 adherents. So at the height of its dominance in the 1500s, you had the Mughal rulers that overtook South Asia, impressing their Muslim culture and religion upon the region. Sikhism, the Sikhs, emerged during this time period too as a Hindu response to Muslim Mughal dynasties. At the time, it was a new religion, Sikhism, kind of irrelevant ritual belief in a priestly class, but still closely related to Hinduism. Well, let's break this down. I have some section here for you to take some notes. And I would label this section here South Asia. You can put South Asia at the top. And first bullet point would be pre-colonial cultures. Pre-colonial cultures, colon, I guess. And then a bullet point there, the Harappan civilization. Harappan, H-A-R-R, I forgot to have this on your terms. H-A-R-R-A-P-P-A-N, civilization, colon. The Dravidians began irrigating about 3000 BC in the Indus Valley. next bullet point underneath of that, there's no written heritage. No written heritage, although they left ruins. And you don't have to write this down, but again, you're getting into the two major different types of historical research, right? Archaeology and writing. And we haven't had writing around all that long, so if you really look at how long man's been around, but you do have, you do have archaeology, the ruins, and that's how most of your historians have been able to ascertain much about the Dravidians. No written heritage. Okay, now we move on to point one under South Asia as I, open the door up to this section. The caste order. So your first fill in the blank there, caste order, and the Aryans. The Aryans imposed this. Now, you don't have to write this down either, but the Aryans came in from North Central Asia, and they brought myths with them, and ended up into a book called the Vedas, and that book leads to Hinduism, the Hindu belief system. So they developed a caste order, and at the top of the order you had the priests, right, or the Brahmins at the top of the social ladder, and then the military, right, the warriors. Warriors is what you want to write there. Warriors and rulers were second on the ladder. Second on the ladder. Then you had your common merchants and artisans. And then at the bottom, you have the untouchables. These are the servants, and they're seen as disgusting and revolting in that society. Now, India is the largest democracy in the world, and epitomizing that democracy, perhaps, is the fact that the untouchables actually have certain seats set aside in the Indian Congress. And you can make your own application of what the untouchables might be here in the United States. And, we know that, most of your politicians, if they're not well, they're generally well heeled by the time they get into certainly Washington. And unfortunately, if they are the middling classes, so many of them come out, right, millionaires after they leave, right? These public servants, go figure. I digress. Moving on. Point two, Buddhism and Jainism. Buddhism, founded in the Ganges River Valley, 500 BC. Again, in response to Buddha's response to Hinduism, right? Hinduism too cold and doctrinaire. Buddha was initially a Hindu. And then I see this little white space there. Yes, a note here. Jainism, right? Jainism. Um, Basically Dharma. Dharma, Dharma. It's Hindu in origin. And Dharma, we're talking about karma, right? Karma, you guys hear about that? Karma, good works, right? Good works, not dependent on divine grace, right? Not dependent on divine grace. Would thoroughly then would thoroughly reject Christianity. Many in the I noticed in the arts, the rock and roll field, more of a more religious people in that realm than you would think. Um, most folks like their religion, and Buddhism seems to be appealing to a great many, right? The good works, and right, you find truth on your own terms, I guess. Many invasions. Point three, many invasions. Many invasions from the northwest into South Asia through the Khyber Pass. Now, if you take a look at your map on page 276, the Khyber Pass is just northwest of Islamabad. right? Modern day Pakistan. You could see that in your map, which is kind of interesting because the outside of the Khyber Pass, before the era of modern transportation, it would be very, very difficult for you know, enemies to get to get to the peninsula because of the Himalaya mountains. But you had the Khyber Pass, right? Bad guys uh, figured it out. Mountain isolation and island openness. Afghanistan. Afghanistan became a mountain refuge for ethnic groups, the Pashtuns in the south, the Indo-Aryan Buddhists of Ceylon. Ceylon is now today modern day Sri Lanka. They developed a civilization on rice. And then you have Muslims, gradually controlled ocean trade routes around the Maldives Islands. And the Maldives have become solidly Muslim. And again, if you take a look at your map on page 276, at the southern tip of the peninsula, you'll see the Maldives Islands. But even though your authors list where they are, you have to look. I would certainly have to put my glasses on to see that. And I'll dwell on that a little later on the Maldives Islands, some of the problems that they have incurred because of their small size. Enter the Europeans. Let me set this up here. We're going to get into colonial impacts on the region. European colonial expansion in the region grows out of trade. The British East India Company came to control over much of the region by the 1800s, with the British government, um, assuming, I'm trying to get the right word for that, assuming colonial control in 1857. The British adopted the role of, quote, civilizing the population by introducing Western education, Western law, and civil service. And they set up what we would call a mercantile economy imposed by the British, reorienting production toward export of primary products to Europe. And mercantilism, in some circles, you'll hear people in the academic world equate it with capitalism. I would strongly argue against that. Mercantilism, it was commercial trade, and it emphasized exports over imports. It had to be try to get a positive balance of trade. But here's the thing: it was heavily regulated. It was always heavily regulated. So that's that's not anywhere near um, certainly pure capitalism. But the British colonial rule ended with a partition of India into two independent countries of India and Pakistan. The partition was based primarily upon religious geography of the region, with India being mostly Hindu and Pakistan being mostly Muslim. And then in 1971, Pakistan further split into the countries of Pakistan and Bangladesh. Let's break this down here. Let's take a look at the fills and colonial expansion. Part B of the lecture, and point one here, trading expansion. The Dutch forced the British out of the East Indies. So and East Indies, think back to our last chapter we looked at, right? Indonesia, Malaysia, right? That region, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines. Back on page 246, right there's that map we looked at last time. But here on page 286, in your map, you could see the area I'm talking about now. Yeah, and the Dutch forced the British out. The British began to focus their attention to India, thus kicking out the Portuguese. And on page 286, there's a map there, color-coded map of like a choropleth map of the various European influences. And I think we've looked at a couple of these before already in the course. Some of the maps you can see where the where the British holdings were, the Portuguese and the Dutch. Interesting visual. But getting back to the fills too, the British East India Company. What they did was, and you can turn to page 301 when you're done looking at the map, page 286. So I want you to take a look at some ports here. The British East India Company took the ports of Mumbai, which is modern day Bombay, on the Arabian Sea side of the peninsula, about 2/3 of the way up, right? And they built one at Chennai, modern day Madras, and they began trading with the populated Kolkata area, right? Otherwise, in the area of Bengal, other you guys know as Calcutta. Now, one of your videos, and it's not too long. These videos aren't too long. Good for education alone, but also good for those discussion questions. British Indian Empire. 1857, you have your first independence war, right? British have been ensconced in the region for 10 years, and you have the first independence war, and it was a major revolt of Indian sepoy troops. And as a result, the British take full control in order to put down the uprising. So what are the effects of this? Well, the British set up the British Indian Empire, or an Indian term, the British Raj, or the British Raj. And the region enters into the global economy into the late 1800s with the export of Indian cotton. And this kind of sets off some negative trade imbalances. And under the mercantile system, what began to happen was they were spending more on imports than they were on exports, and mercantilism is supposed to be export-based. So they wound up getting themselves into some deficits. The British imperial rule greatly impacted the geography of the peninsula too, altering the landscape for usage. Railroads were built to move troops. See, after the Sepoy uprising, the railroads were built to patrol the region better, to put down any potential uprisings, and arguably tearing up some of the landscape as well. Next section, a few points here of white space, and I want to talk about our friends in Afghanistan. And on page 301, you can see that toward the top left-hand side of the map. The British created this. British created it. Put Afghanistan there, and then first bullet point. The British created it in the late 1800s, and they created it as a buffer against Russian expansion. Right? If you just take a look north of Afghanistan, you have that. You have Russia. And we talked about this too when we were there. The Russians didn't really colonize, but they would pick off territory that bordered them. Second bullet point: the new country brought together many fragmented groups. The new country of Afghanistan brought together many fragmented groups. And third bullet point and last bullet point here, I guess, is opium replaced wheat. Opium begins to replace wheat, the late 1990s, and it left city dwellers hungry. And what it did was, probably even a small bullet subpoint underneath this, it began to fund local groups. instead of feeding the city dwellers. So, opium becomes, the major fund crop instead of wheat. Paths to independence. Paths to independence. The origins of India and Pakistan. And page 301 again, your map there. After World War One, Mahatma Gandhi began a policy of nonviolent resistance in seeking independence. And with the 3-4 minute video clip I have on the British Indian Empire, there is some focus on Mr. Gandhi. The area of Kashmir, here it is, the area of Kashmir remains and you can turn to page 288 for this. There's a particular inset map there of the area of Kashmir, and you can just juxtapose it with the map. I believe it's on 301. The area of Kashmir remains a festering border issue. Location makes it tense in relation to its neighbors. And what happened was, kind of the origins to this, the British sold it in 1947. Kashmir kind of opted to go with India. They opted to stay with India as a result of a Pakistani invasion. And then subsequently, Pakistan holds 1/3 of the area. Most of that area is Muslim. So the Kashmiris were granted, in a sense, that's religious liberty in the region. The Indian government was not forcing them to adhere to strict Hinduism at all. The area is majority Muslim. Pakistan's Muslim, and so the Pakistanis invaded based off those pretexts. It was mostly Muslim, and the ruling government in Kashmir was opting to um, become a secular government. So issues with its inhabitants, right? India's installation of government was secular, and Pakistan is Muslim. Looking at your two blanks there. Fighting with Muslim insurgents has set up a line of control, which you can see on your maps. Kashmir, this has been going on a long time. I'd say once a year, if you open up, I'm thinking the Wall Street Journal, right? Wall Street Journal always has a lot of the headlines, an overview of the news that you can see and pick out what you find the most interesting news pieces. And once a year, you'll see where something's been blown up, in Kashmir by Muslim insurgents. The Kashmiris are tired, and they want independence from both. Most Pakistanis see Kashmir as more important than Afghanistan. Back during the Bush administration, when the war was raging in Afghanistan, the Pakistanis were supposed allies of ours. We had a hard time getting them interested, the Pakistani government, in the fight in Afghanistan against Al Qaeda and the Taliban. A big reason was they're more focused on Pakistan or on Kashmir. That was where their attention was. Bush administration froze assets of Pakistani terrorist groups, which includes Pakistani groups. Trump recently, I think it was about a year ago, September 19, at the UN, he met with Prime Minister, I'm trying to remember his name now, Prime Minister of Pakistan, Khan, that's it, Prime Minister Khan, and offered to mediate that crisis. And a few months before that, Indian Prime Minister Modi was over here, and he met with President Trump, and Trump offer the same assistance. And then lastly, I want to talk about, well, next to last, I want to talk about the population. But this will be the last section, and you have to really write anything. I want to end up talking about a little bit about Afghanistan and Sri Lanka and some of the regions around there, or areas around there. With approximately 1.5 billion people, South Asia has the world's largest population. Population densities are high, with the greatest concentrations of people along the rivers and Indian Ocean coasts. Although birth rates have declined over the past 3 decades, the region is experiencing still substantial population growth. Coupled with growth in overall populations, a concurrent movement from rural areas into the cities of the region. And you could turn to page 294, page 294, 295, and 298, and you can look at some population maps. While you're doing that, I guess I'll just say there are more males in India, right? More males in India. And one of the reasons for that is these are kind of FYIs here. Female infanticide is surmised to, quote, save them from suffering, right? The state of the reason. Midwives kill about 16 million female babies a year. And then you have 1% of the population that is affected by AIDS. Some sad stuff there. But yeah, I mean, so an estimated 600 million people will live in the cities by 2025, right? And they're poor, right? This is not good stuff, right? Not good forecasts. India's population, 1.2 billion, second only to China, and it's the world's most populous democracy, which I mentioned earlier. The sheer size of the population has resulted in India having the fourth highest GNI and PPP, gross national income, purchasing power parity, which we looked at earlier in the course. But both are relatively low. Both are relatively low. 80% of India's population has resulted in India having, you know, large majority of Hindu, right? Hindu population. But it's just one of, trying to think how I can say this. It's far less linguistically homogenous, right? It's 80% Hindu. We'll talk about homogeneity. We're talking about sameness. Linguistically, language-wise, less so. Hindi is spoken by roughly 1/3 of the population, but it's just one of 15 official languages in India. More than 2/3 of the population is rural, and most of the folks in rural areas live at or near subsistence levels, right? Not very good living. Having said that, India does have a growing middle class, and its manufacturing sector is large and fairly diverse. Output from high-tech industries increased dramatically over the past 20 years, and the service sector has seen rapid expansion. Let's take a look at my last set of bills. India's economic policy after independence was basically make India a self-sufficient industrial power. So they hit foreign competition with high tariffs and export taxes. So in both the federal and state government, seats are set aside by proportion for scheduled castes and tribes. For another word, or for example, that would include the untouchables, right? That would include the untouchables, or in other words, i.e., that would include the untouchables. The bottom of the caste level, right? Seen as disgusting and revolting, but they have a certain number of seats, giving folks, probably folks involved in the informal economy of India, a voice. Indira and Rajiv Gandhi. Indira, Prime Minister from 1966 to 77. Again, you see a little video clip of her. And Rajiv Gandhi respectively encouraged a green revolution. We looked at that last time in Southeast Asia. And they opened up the economy to world economic forces. Famines ended as a result. Famines ended. Election costs, though, election costs and huge subsidies took the country back into debt during after Rajiv. 75% of India's exports go to the Persian Gulf. India is the third largest cotton producer in the world. Cotton makes them an economic world player. 200 million cattle, also greatest surplus in the world, since Hindus do not eat meat. They are therefore a leading meat exporter. And then lastly, just want to talk about Pakistan, Bangladesh, a little bit more of Afghanistan. Pakistan and Bangladesh are both, you can turn to your map on page 301, this would be helpful, are both predominantly Muslim, but Bangladesh is a secular republic, while Pakistan is, as I mentioned earlier, is an Islamic republic, currently under military rule. Both are the world's poorest countries, occupying much of the delta created by the Ganges and the Brahmaputra rivers. More than half of the Bangladeshi labor force is engaged in farming. Much of the country is at or near sea level, right? Making it vulnerable to both seasonal flooding and ocean surges during the tropical cyclones. So while agricultural production has grown in Bangladesh, it has not kept pace with population growth, a la Thomas Malthus, right? Predictions from Malthus a couple chapters back. Pakistan is similarly dependent upon agriculture, and much of its the country's best farmland is owned by just a small number of some of the wealthiest people in the country. The physical landscape results in Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bhutan being isolated from global activity. In Afghanistan and Nepal, we know about Afghanistan, they have struggled with internal strife, recent internal strife. Again, Afghanistan, as unfortunately we know, has had a protracted civil war following a failed Soviet invasion in 1979. The hardline Taliban rose to power in the 1990s, but their support of Al-Qaeda prompted a U.S.-led invasion that brought a new government into power in 2004, and we're still bogged down there. We're beginning to wonder why. The president has made some enemies in the military community, your political military people, by making noise, right, about getting out of there. The island countries of Sri Lanka, and again, Sri Lanka and the Maldives, if you take a look at your map, page 301, they are at the southern tip, each side of the southern tip. Maldives, like I said, hard to see, which is a problem. I'll get to that in a second. U.S.-led invasion have brought new government to power. The island countries of Sri Lanka and the Maldives are better connected to the global economic system, though, than most of the rest of the region. But here's the thing with those two countries, those two areas, they're both vulnerable to ocean hazards, like the 2004 tsunami. It was December 26, 2004. Now, if you take a look at the Maldives Islands, if you're flying by jet airliner into India, across the Indian Ocean, at one time you could see those islands, but because of the tsunami, you can only see half of them. And um, if there's another catastrophe like that, they'll probably be washed up. So they have that issue. Sri Lanka has been struggling with the insurgent Tamil Tigers in the northern part of the island, terrorist group. Tourism has been a focus of development in the mountainous and coastal locations, although Bhutan limits the number of tourists entering the country in order to minimize the impact of foreign culture. It's kind of interesting. There's a couple more things on the tsunami. I think there were 35, my number is 35,322 confirmed deaths in Sri Lanka. That's where the tsunami emanated from, just off the coast of Sri Lanka. There were 7,000 people displaced, 12,405 deaths in India, 647,599 displaced. So again, especially with the Maldives Islands, there are some concerns about its existence. So, wrap this up here with the lecture, the graphic organizer, which you should have. So posted, and we'll talk about what's up ahead. I'll turn you guys loose for the week's assignments. South Asia, cause and effect chart. The Harappan civilization, right? Dravidians arrived 3000 BC. And the Aryans, right? Aryans bring Hinduism and a caste order. They bring, with Hinduism, you have, let's look at the caste order. Priests, the top of that order, the Brahmins, warriors and rulers, common merchants and artisans, and at the bottom, the untouchables. An offshoot, not an offshoot of Hinduism, a response to Hinduism, right, would be Buddhism, right? Response to Hinduism. Jainism is a Hindi in origin, with the twist of karma, right, and good works that Hinduism lacked to Buddha. Because Buddha is was not the originator of Jainism. Invasions through the Khyber Pass, colonial impacts, British East India Company, 1857, they set up the first independence war against the British. British put that down and really tighten the reins of what goes on the peninsula and set up the British Indian Empire. What's the effects? The region enters the global economy through cotton, right? British imperial rule augments the geography of India via railroads to put down any potential uprisings. British create Afghanistan as a buffer to the Russians. A lot of fragmentation there. By the 90s, opium is a major fund crop there. But backing up, Mahatma Gandhi, right? Non-violent protests. The British grant independence. They divide the peninsula up, or the protectorate up on their way out. India, which is Hindu, Pakistan, which is Muslim. India is given Kashmir, set up a secular government, and there's a line of control because the majority of the people there are Muslim, and the Pakistani government invades it. It's put down, but 1/3 of Kashmir is under Muslim control, Pakistani control, and right, a lot of friction about who should be controlling what there. India becomes economically self-sufficient through tariffs and taxes on imports. Democracy, it's the world's most populous. Proportion of parliament seats for all the castes. 1966, right? 1966, 1977, some more effects. Indira Gandhi comes to power. Rajiv in 1984 to 89, and encourage a green revolution. And they bring India into the global economy. 75% of your exports go to the Persian Gulf. Cotton, the third largest producers in the world and the greatest suppliers of cattle. Take a look at what is up ahead. And, wrong button there. Here we go. Wednesday, you'll have some comprehension questions that will be due. They are, by the time you're looking at this, they will have been posted. So you'll have a few days to work on that. Got a couple of videos. One on the British Indian Empire and one on Indira Gandhi. Right, Indira Gandhi, the first woman prime minister. And then the reading is in your textbook. The reading is an important one. They all are. But this one here, page 288, 289, it's basically about Kashmir. About Kashmir, and there's a section on here about, counterpoint, point and counterpoint. You know, the various arguments. I mean, who's in the right? You know, who's in the wrong? So I would be interested. It would probably behoove you, as I say. I think I say this in the instructions, to pay attention to the point and counterpoint, because the discussion question for this week will involve Kashmir. So my antennas, folks, are going to be up. Thursday, of course, in the news. Friday through Sunday, the discussion questions. Kashmir will be involved. And then Monday, right, the quiz on this section. And then we start to head west, right, to North Africa, Southwestern Asia, right? Another political hotspot in the world. So, again, any questions, comments, concerns, anything not working that I forgot to publish, get a hold of me. I'm looking at the phone all the darn time, right? So I'm easily accessible. So until next time, I will talk to you then. Have a fantastic week, all right? And do well. Bye.